Hopefully you've now already run your first backtest with OMS and created your first dashboard. So now let's get your first optimization added to that same dashboard. Returning to the OMS input parameters, the Use OMS setting serves exactly the same purpose in an optimization as it does for a single backtest, so you should already be familiar with what this does. The next two text values are also the same as for a backtest. Remember, if you keep the dashboard name exactly the same as it was previously, the new optimization you're about to perform will be added to that existing dashboard. This connects the new results with your previous backtest on the same dashboard. On the other hand, if you enter a dashboard name that you've not used before, OMS will create a brand new dashboard with that name and add it to your dashboard index. The second text field is for you to enter a description, this time specifically for your optimization, and that will appear above the optimization metrics in the dashboard here to allow you to fully document the process you took for future reference. The next three date fields serve the same purpose as before, so hopefully no further explanation is required here. Refer back to the running your first backtest video if you need to. The desired backtest drawdown tolerance setting is only used for single backtests, not for optimizations, so this can safely be ignored this time. But the next two settings are important. These only have any functional impact for optimizations, so I didn't explain these in the previous video. Let's get into the detail for each of these now. The first is the performance metric you'd like to use for the custom criterion. But before I can properly explain this, I need to first explain how performance metrics differ in OMS compared with MT5. In MT5, you need to select a single performance metric that you wish to use for an optimization here. Then, when you view the various optimization charts after the optimization is completed, it's this value that's used on all of the charts. You're not able to view the charts for any other metric unless you run a completely new optimization, which of course can be very time consuming. In your OMS dashboard, however, you can view 2D and 3D surface charts using various performance metrics, all from a single optimization. The top part of the drop-down list here shows common MT5 metrics, while the bottom includes additional ones calculated by OMS, such as Van Tharp's expectancy and SQN, and useful ratios like CAGR or compound annual growth rate over the maximum drawdown or mean drawdown. This means you're no longer forced to select a metric before you start the optimization. The charts in the OMS dashboard can easily be viewed based on many metrics by simply selecting them from the drop-down list. This is especially useful because metrics by design tell you different things about a strategy's performance. Return over drawdown based metrics give you an indication of the level of reward you can receive from your strategy, normalized by the risk you can expect to suffer. But metrics like profit factor instead provide you with a ratio of winning to losing trade amounts, which tells you very different information about your strategy. But as stated, in MT5 you can only view one of these aspects of your strategy unless you perform multiple optimizations, which as I said before is extremely time consuming. If you need a description of what each of the performance metrics in OMS measures and how they work, you can see the same metrics produced for every backtest, and here on the Metrics tab, by hovering over the cells in the table, you'll see a pop-up description that explains each one. Now, you might be asking yourself the question, if I'm using OMS, does it even matter therefore what I select for this value here in MT5? And the answer is that most of the time, no, it doesn't. But there is just one exception. That is if you're using the fast genetic-based optimization algorithm. The reason it's important here is because this is the metric that MT5 uses to determine how good each parameter combination is, and therefore which parameters to combine to seek improvements in performance as the genetic algorithm moves through each generation. So if you think that the Sharpe ratio will be the best way to inform the genetic algorithm, then you'd choose that. Or if you thought it was profit factor, then you'd choose that. But what if you thought one of the custom OMS performance metrics might be best, like CAGR over max drawdown, or one of the others that we saw here? How can you request that the genetic algorithm use that? Well, you'd simply choose Custom Max here, which tells MT5 that you want to use one of your own metrics, and then from the drop-down on the OMS settings, you choose the metric you wanted the genetic algorithm to use. And that's the only time you need to consider which option to choose on this setting, i.e. when you're using the genetic algorithm and have the MT5 selection set to Custom Max. Otherwise, it doesn't get used because, as I said, you have access to all of these values in the OMS dashboard after the optimization has completed anyway. Before we move on to the next setting, there's just one more thing I want to explain, but this will only be applicable to you if you've developed your own custom performance metric. If you have and you want to use this, OMS supports it fully. Simply select Custom Max here in the MT5 settings and then User's Own Proprietary Performance Metric here in the OMS settings, then providing that you've hooked your metrics calculation into the on-tester code snippet, you'll be able to see your own metrics values in the OMS dashboard and use it to display on optimization charts and to use it in the OMS parameter selection algorithms. Moving on now to the next setting, minimum required trades for inclusion. This is used in a similar context to the previous setting, and it defines the level of statistical significance that you're willing to tolerate for each parameter combination based on the sample size or the number of trades. For example, if you set this to 250, any parameter values that produce fewer than 250 trades will be considered statistically insignificant and will be excluded from the optimization algorithm by overriding the value of the custom performance metric and setting it to a negative value. So this only has any functional impact when again you've selected Custom Max here. What it's particularly useful for is to deter the genetic algorithm from considering any parameter combinations that have poor statistical significance. If you don't do this, when parameter combinations with very low numbers of trades happen to perform well by random chance, then the genetic algorithm will focus its attention on these suboptimal sections of the parameter space, and this will then almost certainly affect your selection of the most robust parameters, and therefore could impact the out-of-sample performance in walk-forward tests or live trading. How you set this value will be determined by what you consider to be a statistically significant number of trades to give reliable results. The final setting, close terminal after optimization, is used to determine if the MT5 terminal is automatically shut down after an optimization has completed. The reason for this is that a fairly rare and intermittent glitch in MT5 means that if you run 2 or more optimizations consecutively without a restart in between, very occasionally on-tested dinit doesn't run following the latest optimization. This in turn means OMS is unable to get the data it needs to properly write to the dashboard. Hopefully MetaQuote will fix this soon, and this setting can then be removed. I'd recommend keeping it set to true for now though. Before you progress to starting your first optimization, just a couple of things to note. If you use the fast genetic algorithm, your results will appear properly in the dashboard, but just understand that there might be gaps in the 2D and 3D surface charts for the parameter values that MT5 chose not to test. Secondly, note that OMS fully supports the MQL5 cloud network. So if that's your preferred way to perform optimizations instead of utilizing local agents, then you can continue with that approach when using OMS. So what are your next steps? Set the optimization method to either slow complete algorithm or fast genetic-based algorithm, depending on your preferred method. Make sure your OMS settings are as you want them to be, and then remember to set the EA's parameters you wish to optimize as you normally would, and then click Start. Once your optimization has completed, you'll see it appear at the bottom of your chosen dashboard.